My name is Joy Sybesma, and I am the founder and CEO of Scalejoy. Scalejoy is a business that helps other businesses as they go through periods of growth and scale. And we help them specifically with leadership development, and leadership development happens in a few iterations. We offer executive coaching, we offer facilitation for leadership offsites, and we offer customized manager training programs. The top qualities in an ideal leader to me are self-awareness, they are growth mindset, and they are being inspirational. So I think being inspiring or inspirational is an important quality as a leader because to me, you have to actually be inspired in order to be inspiring. And so when I think about the people who have really made a difference to me in my career, they're people who not only are inspired themselves, but also bring that inspiration forward to their team. And I think inspiration can come in lots of different forms, but knowing what it is that they care about in this world, spending time actually investing in that for themselves to stay inspired, then they can bring that inspiration to their teams. And I think about right now, especially leadership isn't getting any easier. And so actually being that voice of inspiration for the team can really help them get through difficult things and help them overcome hurdles that they maybe couldn't have without that level of inspiration. One time, a particularly challenging time that I felt like I needed to have inspiration myself to then be inspiring to my team was actually leading through COVID. When COVID happened, I was actually leading an entirely global team, and we were a hybrid team at the begin with, but with COVID, we all went remote, and we had a whole team of recruiters whose job was to hire people. And all of a sudden, we didn't have any hiring to be done. We completely froze all hiring. So instead of about 9 recruiters spending the whole next year finding people jobs, we said, we don't want to let you go. We're going to try to keep your job. But in order to do that, we need to figure out something else that you can do to add value for the organization. And it was I think an example of being inspirational, but also being practical, of first and foremost, inspiring that you actually get to keep a job here and that the company is going to continue to invest in you because we believe that this change is temporary. It ended up being longer than we thought, but we were able to then practically talk to each recruiter about what do they feel like they could do to contribute to the organization in a different way. And we were able to maintain all of our recruiters, but give them different experiences. And I feel like that was a great example of actually persevering through something really challenging, but also like having an opportunity come out of that that was unexpected. Growth mindset is such an important quality, in my opinion. I love Carol Dweck's work on mindset, and really the foundation of it is that we can always continue to evolve and grow and learn new things. And I think the leaders that I've worked with who embody that growth mindset, they are constantly seeking out new ways to evolve and grow themselves. And they also believe in their team's ability to continue to grow and change. And so if I think about leaders and managers who have people who are really loyal to them, oftentimes it's because they're feeling invested in, they're getting the coaching, they're getting the development that they want and need in their career. And I think in order to do that well, a leader really has to embody that growth mindset. I try to continue to grow my growth mindset in a lot of different ways, especially now that I run my own business. I think it's almost easier when you're a part of a team and part of a company to constantly be facing new challenges, new business opportunities that require you to evolve and change and learn new things. When you're an entrepreneur, you have to find that for yourself. But I think it's been really interesting to actually respond to the needs of my clients and my customers, and that's enabled me to continue to grow. So, for example, I'm a big believer in community. I've led peer groups, both virtually and in person. And once I moved to Charleston, I realized I didn't have any professional community here. And it was no longer enough for me to get on the commuter jet and go to New York every Tuesday at 6 a.m. from the airport and find my professional community there. I really needed it here. And so I literally just asked anybody I knew who was a business owner for recommendations of people who were local, who would maybe be willing to have coffee or dinner with me. And I just reached out to them on LinkedIn. And Charleston is a beautiful place because people say yes and people will meet with you and take a chance on you. And the amount I've learned from this small community of business leaders, founders, entrepreneurs has been absolutely incredible. One person gave me great feedback that I really needed to hear that I'm already starting to implement into my business. One person I'm actually partnering on a special project. So for me, I get a lot of inspiration and motivation out of human connection. And actually, when you find that you're missing something in your life, to go out and build it, I find is a great way to cultivate your growth mindset, but also knowing the way that you like to learn and ensuring that you make that happen for yourself in your day-to-day. Self-awareness to me is the most important quality in a leader. And I think it didn't emerge for me until probably later in my career, the criticality of it and the importance of it, primarily because I saw the difference between leaders who possessed it and leaders who did not. So let's talk about the leaders who do. To me, in order to be self-aware, you have to be humble. You have to be vulnerable. You also have to be extremely confident in your gifts and your strengths. And I think that whole body of understanding is really what is self-awareness. And what does that enable for leaders? That enables them to choose roles in companies that are going to be the most aligned to who they are authentically and let them lead authentically. I think that that also enables them to ask for and take feedback and continue to grow and cultivate that growth mindset. I've also experienced a lot of leaders who didn't have that. And I think to cultivate self-awareness, it takes a lot of inner work and time, and also surrounding yourself with people who will tell you the truth because they believe in you and believe that you can be better and will give you that feedback accordingly. So to me, self-awareness is so critical, and so many of the other important qualities of leaders stem from it. Yes. So some examples of what lack of self-awareness can do to a team or to an organization. Unfortunately, I have hundreds rolling through my head, but ones where we've actually made changes and things have gone better. So one specifically is, I love the quote, there's intent and there's perception, and we want to close the gap between intent and perception. Oftentimes I find with leaders who are lacking self-awareness, they have positive intent, but the way that their actions or what they say comes across has a negative perception. And there's quite a bit of a delta between oftentimes the intent and the perception. So leaders who actually can close that gap by understanding the impact of their actions and then just evolve or shift the way that they say something and the way that they think about something in order for the perception to match the intent. And so specifically, I actually think that more often than not, I've experienced leaders who they had a lot of self-awareness, but they didn't care about the impact of their actions. They were self-aware and they were convicted in their way of thinking and their way of doing. And the impact of that can be people quitting who are great, who just don't feel like they can work with that type of leader. I've had several CEOs that I worked with actually lose acquisition or venture capital funding deals as a result of not reading the room and not being self-aware of how they actually came across. So there can be massive impact to it. But also on the positive side, I think as long as a leader is self-aware, even if their way is maybe different and controversial, if they're self-aware and they have a growth mindset, they likely can still be really successful by surrounding themselves with people who understand them and are aligned with how they communicate and how they lead. So prioritizing my own growth mindset simultaneously while prioritizing cultivating that in others. There was a big realization I had when I was working for a company where my team was in a very different time zone than me. And I'm a morning person. I always have been. When I'm at my best, I'm spending most mornings by myself in a space of learning and reflection. When I prioritize that, I tend to be more effective, more efficient, more inspired, all of those things. But when I was managing this team in Europe, I would wake up and they had been up for 6 hours. And so I woke up every day feeling like it's time to give time to my team, right? I need to jump right into Zooms and start supporting them and helping them solve their problems for the day. And only took a few weeks for me to start feeling like I was being really ineffective. And I couldn't quite figure out why. Like, I understand my KPIs for the quarter. My team is amazing. I'm working harder than I ever have. Why am I lacking inspiration? Why am I not getting as much done as I normally would? And I remember having a conversation with my boss at the time. And he's like, well, what's your best time of day? And I said, it's the morning. He goes, well, how are you spending your mornings? And I said, I wake up scrambling, feeling behind, and I immediately get on Zoom starting at about 7 a.m. And I'm on Zoom until, at least 6 p.m. and then rinse, repeat the day. And he said, well, why don't you reclaim some of those mornings? And I remember being like, obviously, yes, why wouldn't I do that? But I almost needed him to permission it for me in that way and remind me of how important it was. So for me, actually prioritizing my mornings is super critical in me maintaining my growth mindset. It's when I'm the sharpest. It's when I'm in the mood to learn and reflect. And I find that it's really critical for me as a leader to preserve that time. Motivation is a super fascinating topic, and thinking about how to motivate my team, I always go back to Dan Pink's book, Drive, which is all about the science of motivation. And what I find the most compelling about the research is that there's actually three common motivators for people at work. One is autonomy, the ability to be self-directed. One is mastery, the ability to learn and grow and get better at things. And one is purpose, the ability to feel like your work is connected to something bigger than you. And I find I love to almost like imagine being in a lab with my team, and we're testing the different components of that formula to figure out what they need. And I think what people need to be motivated changes over the course of life. Different life chapters, different things matter to people. But specifically, figuring out like, okay, do you need more autonomy? Meaning you need more space, you need more trust to be able to work independently. I used to fantasize pre-COVID about working from a coffee shop. I remember walking to the train in New York City to go to the office and seeing coffee shops and thinking, if only I could just like work from there today. But it was not possible. It wasn't part of the corporate culture back then. So for me, motivation would have been like, give me some autonomy to work from a different place, and I'll be really inspired doing that. Mastery, the ability to get better at things. I think about it a lot. I work with a lot of teams who are working on their learning and development budgets and how they're going to spend their learning dollars. And 9 times out of 10 people either want to go to a conference, they want to get a coach, they want to work with a mentor. And I think actually motivating people through giving them an opportunity to continue to find mastery is a really beautiful thing. I have a specific example. I'm working with a client right now, and we're doing a lot of work around Clifton Strengths. And you can do a lot from that book just by reading it and practicing with it. But her company is letting her get certified in Clifton Strengths. And this is a person who's very senior in her career, and I've never seen her more motivated to go and get that certification. She is pumped about it. And then the last one, purpose. It's interesting. I facilitate quite a bit of manager trainings, and this came up the other day where we talked about the connection between autonomy and purpose, and that oftentimes you actually get too much autonomy and you almost feel like people don't know what you're working on, and you start to actually feel disconnected from the purpose when that happens. So purpose, actually having the context and the reminder of why your work matters and how your work impacts other people. So for me, motivating my people, it's all about understanding which of those components they need and then building our own motivation plan accordingly. I have been lucky to have a lot of leadership mentors and coaches in my life. One in particular that stands out, the first executive coach I ever hired, his name is Ben Brooks, and he's still very much in my life, and he's amazing. He struck this beautiful balance of what Ravi Gupta of Sequoia talks about, demanding and supportive. He holds me ruthlessly accountable, but I know he's got my back. And he helped me make some major changes in my life that needed to happen. I started my business while working with him. And even something as simple as I invested in buying a shed and converted it into an office because I needed space and quiet to focus and to actually build my business. And he helped me see that and make that decision for myself. So the power of having an executive coach when you're ready for it and when you know what you need, I think is probably the best investment I've ever made in myself. Other leaders, though, who've inspired me, I remember my very first internship, the CEO of the company said, every manager you have for your career, take something away that you'll replicate about how they acted and interacted with you, and take something away that you'll eliminate. And I really held that close to myself as I went through my career. And I can honestly say every manager I worked with, I took something that I added to my repertoire of leadership skills, and I took something that I decided I would completely remove or tweak to resonate with me. So truly, I've learned from so many leaders. And then I think there's a huge value in peers. Peer learning has been a big focus for me for my whole career. My first HR job, I ran HR for a couple of companies. My first head of HR job, I actually got it when I was 4 months pregnant. And I was not prepared to take a job 4 months pregnant, but this company was amazing. And they said, you can actually design our maternity leave policy and you can be the first one to take it. And it'll be this amazing example for our organization. So I took this job, but I had never worked in that industry before. I had never been the head of the function before. I was working for someone who'd never had someone in that seat before. So it was basically like the blind leading the blind. Like nobody knew what was going on or how to do this successfully. One thing I've always been, though, is resourceful. So I remember I went to a breakfast that was put on by a vendor, and there were a bunch of leaders who are in similar roles to mine. And I just paid attention to who was really smart and interesting. And I went up to them after and I said, you're really smart and interesting. Do you think you'd be willing to have breakfast with me? I'm in a brand new role. I only have like a few months to prove myself before I go on maternity leave, and I need help. And again, people said yes, and it was amazing. And I still keep in touch with a lot of those people to this day. So investing in your peer network, I think you can find so much inspiration and learning in those networks as well. I have a lot of advice for new and emerging leaders. I'll try to narrow it down because hindsight is 20/20, right? We just know this from having lived experience. The first thing I would say is follow your strengths. So early on in my career, I actually was an assistant buyer. I loved fashion my whole life. I was an artist. I liked to illustrate girls in pretty clothes. And I decided to make a career out of it and go into retail buying. The problem with that was the critical skill set of a buyer is actually not artistic. It's much more of a math job. And so I'd spent all of my college career and then my early years of my work career actually focusing on something that I was not inherently good at. And I had great feedback from my first boss who said, Joy, you seem like more of a people stress person than a numbers stress person. Maybe we should find a different role for you at the company, like in HR or something. And it was that boss seeing that in me and having the courage to say that to me that literally changed the trajectory of my career. So I think if I could go back in time, I would encourage my younger self, but also people who are emerging as leaders to really be honest with yourself about where your strengths lie and orient yourself into a career where you're going to be able to use those. A lot of people say follow your passion or follow your interests. I actually think it's more important to follow your strengths, and I think the passions can emerge. Other advice I would give emerging leaders is the power of networking. And I think we do a lot of talk about networking when it comes to finding a job, but I think networking is a much bigger picture idea than just networking for a job. So thinking about who do I know and who do I need to know in order to support me in being successful in the career and the life that I want to have. I worked with this young gentleman who he asked me to have coffee with him. I think it was his third day on the job. And at the end of our coffee, he thanked me and he said, what's one thing I could do to add value to your life? And I remember being so blown away, like, you're asking me that? Like something you can add value in my life? And I remember thinking, like, you showing up to this conversation and being so present and engaged and even having a question like that is adding value to my life. who else do you know who's like you? And I remember he ended up introducing more referrals to our organization than anybody else had because he had this unique charisma and skill set that we really wanted to replicate. But he also did something at the end. He said, who are two people who you think would add value to my life that would be willing to have coffee with me? And I just caught up with this person probably 6 months ago after not having seen him in a decade. And I said, are you still doing that thing with the coffees? And he said, I literally have never taken a break. He said, I've kept track of every single person and who they've connected me with. And he said, the list is at 1,700 people now who I've had coffee with because of just this simple act. So the power of cultivating a network, it's actually not, I think, as hard as people think it is. It can be a little awkward to put yourself out there, but I find if you can offer anything to give value to that person, people will usually say yes to giving you advice or supporting you in some way. So following your strengths and cultivating your network, two things I think that people should really focus on as they emerge in their leadership profession. To summarize, I think that there's a few things that I want to leave you all with. One is just the power of self-awareness, knowing who you are, knowing what your strengths are, and following those ruthlessly. I think it's honestly the key to happiness and success in your career. The second thing is that every person you encounter is an opportunity to connect and probably an opportunity to learn. So invest in your network. Your network is your net worth. So make it a priority. Another thing I would say is motivation, I think, comes from within. And oftentimes as a leader, we look to other people to bring us motivation. But I think the most successful leaders I've encountered are ones who really take that responsibility to be their own driver, to find their own motivation and inspiration, but then also prioritize that in their day-to-day and in their schedule. So thank you for having me, and I wish all of you the best of luck in your leadership journey.